Welcome to this deep dive. I'm really intrigued by this chapter, Pathways to a Sustainable Future. It's like you're really focused on solutions this time around, not just the problems.
Yeah, it's refreshing to see someone really wanting to understand the HOW. Like, okay, what can we actually do about this stuff?
Right. Like, how can we actually make a more sustainable world?
Yeah.
And the chapter dives right in, starting with decarbonization in section 16.1. It really lays out the urgency. We got to move away from fossil fuels. They still make up, a crazy 80% of global energy, right?
It's wild, isn't it? 80%. It's a huge challenge, but also it just shows the massive potential for change too, right? Just imagine the impact if we could shift even just a little bit of that to renewables.
Totally. And they actually give specific strategies to do just that, like carbon pricing, which is basically putting a price on carbon emissions so that businesses are actually incentivized to reduce their footprint. Sweden's doing some interesting things with that, Canada too, but with totally different approaches.
Right. Sweden straight up has a carbon tax, so you directly add a cost to emissions. Canada's got this cap and trade system, where they set a limit and companies can trade permits.
Oh, I see.
It's kind of fascinating seeing these different ways of tackling it.
Yeah, and the chapter doesn't pretend there's one right answer. It's more like, here are the pros and cons of each.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah.
Like Sweden, they've been pretty successful in cutting emissions, but then you also get folks saying, hey, this is hitting lower income households harder. Makes you think.
Exactly. And then you got Canada's system, which is seen as better for businesses because it's more flexible, but it's tougher to see how well it's actually working. Like, is it really moving the needle? Tough to say.
Yeah. Is there even such a thing as a perfect solution? Probably not.
Probably not, no. But hey, at least we're seeing people try different things in the real world, right? It's all about figuring out what works where and just constantly learning and adapting.
Yeah. Love that. So it's not GST carbon pricing. It's also phasing out coal, which, the chapter makes clear that's the worst of the fossil fuels. And it actually mentions Germany, Canada, and South Korea as being kind of leaders in this whole shutting down coal plants thing. What's interesting is that they're all doing it for different reasons. Like Germany has a huge environmental movement. Canada's worried about the health impacts from the bad air quality. South Korea is more concerned with relying less on energy from other countries, if that makes sense.
It's such a great illustration of how, even though the motivations are different, you can still end up going for the same goal. It highlights that there's not this magic one-size-fits-all solution out there. Every country's got to figure out its own way, right?
Yeah.
Based on what's going on there, their priorities.
Totally. But yeah, it's clear that ditching coal is just like non-negotiable at this point. The pollution, the impact on climate change, it's undeniable. So seeing countries take action is super encouraging.
Definitely encouraging, but we got to be real about how hard this is going to be. A lot of countries still depend on coal big time for energy, and you can't just snap your fingers and make it disappear. It's going to take investment in other sources and support for those communities whose jobs are tied to the coal industry. It's complicated.
Yeah, no doubt. That's such an important point. It has to be a fair transition for the planet and for the people. Otherwise, it's just going to backfire. Yeah. You can't just shut things down and expect everything to be fine. It's about creating new opportunities and ensuring things go smoothly for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And that's where things like investing in renewables come into play. And you know what? The chapter talks about the incredible growth we've seen in solar and wind. Their costs have just plummeted, making them way more competitive with those dirty fuels.
Yeah, it's not just about idealism anymore. It actually makes economic sense, which is huge EE. When things are good for the wallet, that's when change really happens.
You got it. And it gives some cool examples. We're talking whole countries running mostly on renewables, Costa Rica, Iceland. These guys are doing it. Even China, the world's biggest emitter, they're pouring money into solar and wind.
It's wild how fast things are changing. Like, are we at a tipping point? It feels like we might be. It makes you wonder if these countries can pull it off. What's holding everyone else back?
That's a tough question. It's a tangled web of issues, for sure. But those examples you mentioned, those are inspiring, They show that this clean energy future, it's not a pipe dream, it's actually happening.
All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that always blows my mind. The circular economy. So the chapter describes it as moving away from that take, make, dispose system and instead keeping resources in use for as long as possible. So it's about making things durable, repairable, reusing, repairing, recycling, the whole shebang.
It really flips the script on how we think about producing and consuming, right? It's not just about less garbage, it's about literally redesigning how we make things and the whole system itself.
Love that. And the Netherlands, these guys are all about it. They're aiming for a 100% circular economy by 2050. It's crazy ambitious. But they're doing things like closing material loops, promoting eco-design, and trying out collaborative consumption models.
And then you got Finland. They're doing incredible stuff too, right? Really focused on industrial symbiosis, where what's waste for one industry becomes the raw material for another.
And pretty neat, huh?
That is so cool. So we've got the Netherlands with this top-down, government-driven approach, and then Finland's more bottom-up, focusing on collaboration between businesses and research. It's like two sides of the same coin, and you need both for real change to happen.
Totally. It shows there's not just one path to success. It's about finding what works for each place.
Right, like context matters, and they're both seeing good results. The Netherlands is already at a 24.5% circularity rate, meaning like a quarter of their stuff is reused or recycled, and Finland's cutting down waste and resource use and even creating green jobs. It's about looking at waste and seeing resource instead, and designing systems that don't produce so much of it in the first place.
It's like turning the whole thing upside down. It's not about just being less bad. It's about rethinking how we do things entirely.
And people are starting to get it, you know? From companies doing things differently to those big international collaborations like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Circular Economy 100 initiative, it's gaining momentum.
Okay, so we've talked about ditching fossil fuels and embracing a more circular way of doing things. But now the chapter gets into the human side of things. Section 16.2, education, awareness, and behavior change. And their point is it's not enough to just know about stuff. We got to actually change how we behave. It's about the head and the heart.
You nailed it. Knowledge is great, but it's just the beginning. You got to translate that into action. That's where education comes in, making people feel empowered to make good choices and actually be part of the solution.
Right. And they emphasize integrating sustainability into school stuff from like a young age.
Yeah.
So kids actually grow up understanding these things and feel like they can do something about it.
Totally. We need future generations who get it, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just about the kids, it's all of us, right? Like we all need to be learning about this stuff forever, becoming more sustainable in how we live.
Exactly. Like making it part of our culture where learning leads to action. Like those awesome documentaries that make you want to go out and change the world, or those community workshops where you learn how to compost or fix your own clothes.
Yes. Those are perfect examples. It's about making this relevant and accessible to everyone, wherever they are.
And it goes beyond formal education, too. The chapter mentions public awareness campaigns using stories, humor, even really striking visuals to get people emotionally involved so they're inspired to act.
Think about those anti-smoking ads that really changed how people thought about smoking and led to real policy shifts. Or those images of the ocean choked with plastic, which really sparked a global movement against single-use plastics.
Powerful stuff. And it's not just about awareness. It's about actually nudging people towards better choices. The chapter even talks about behavioral economics.
Oh yeah, that's fascinating. Like how tiny changes in design or how you frame something can totally influence our choices. Like what if every time you go to get coffee, the reusable cup is right there and the disposable one is hidden away? Or double-sided printing was always the default.
I love that. Those are such simple yet effective tweaks, right? It's about making this sustainable option the easy option. Not guilt-tripping people, but just like creating an environment where those good choices become normal.
Exactly. And celebrating those choices. What if towns had rewards for people who compost or ride the bus or buy local? It's about making sustainable living fun and rewarding, something people feel good about doing.
Okay, so we've got strategies for change, education, awareness, all important. But the chapter also makes it clear that nothing works without everyone working together, right? Section 16.3 dives into global collaboration, emphasizing that when it comes to sustainability, no country is an island. We got ETA cooperate to tackle these massive environmental challenges.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that our planet's all connected. What happens in one part affects everyone, right? Climate change, pollution, biodiversity loss. These are global problems. They need global solutions.
And they highlight some awesome examples of this cooperation already happening, like the Paris Agreement, a landmark effort to limit global warming, with like 196 countries signing on. It's not perfect, but it shows what's possible when we all work together towards a shared goal.
Oh, for sure. The Paris Agreement is a huge deal, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. There are tons of other examples of international collaborations out there making a real difference. Take the Montreal Protocol, for example. That one successfully phased out those ozone-depleting substances, and now the ozone layer is actually healing. Or CITES, The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, that's helped protect tons of plants and animals from going extinct because of trade.
Those are amazing examples. And it's not just about agreements between countries, right? The chapter also talks about how important it is to have partnerships between governments, businesses, NGOs, and local communities. It's about getting everyone involved.
Imagine a local community working with businesses to create a circular economy for their waste, or countries sharing their knowledge and resources to build renewable energy projects.
It's about realizing that we're all in this together and that working together is the key to finding solutions that benefit everyone.
It's so inspiring to see these partnerships popping up all over the world, you know? It shows that people are recognizing the need for collective action and they're finding creative ways to make it happen. It's about creating a more sustainable future together.
So we've covered a lot of ground, from the nitty-gritty details of transitioning away from those fossil fuels and embracing that circular system to the power of education and global collaboration. As we wrap up this part of the deep dive, what's really standing out to you?
Honestly, it's the sense of possibility that really gets me. We're not just talking about abstract ideas here. The chapter gives us concrete examples of solutions that are already being implemented around the world. It's like a reminder that we actually have the knowledge, the tools, and the creativity to create that more sustainable future. But it's going to take action at all levels, from individuals making changes in their lives to governments implementing policies to those global institutions working together. It's a collective effort, you know?
I totally agree. And what's exciting is that this action is already happening. We're seeing a shift in how people think, a growing awareness that our planet's all connected, and a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking and doing things.
Exactly. It's a time of huge challenge, but it's also a time of incredible opportunity. And it's up to each and every one of us to decide what role we want to play in shaping that future, you know? It really feels like we're at a crossroads, doesn't it? Like the choices we make now, they're going to have a huge impact on what happens next. It's kind of scary, but exciting too, you know?
Totally. But, we've been so focused on this chapter 16, and I'm realizing you sent me so much other cool stuff too. It's like the giant buffet of information. I want to try it all.
Let's do it. What's caught your eye?
Okay, so there's a whole section in this handbook on economic systems, and chapter 1, Global Economic Overview, is pretty mind-blowing. It basically puts sustainability into the context of the whole global economy. We're talking GDP growth, trade, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, that's a crucial perspective for sure, because you can't just ignore the link between like money and the environment, right? They're totally intertwined. And it reminds us that we can't just solve sustainability without thinking about the whole economic picture. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Like in section 1.4, debt and financial stability, they dive into global debt levels and how that affects our ability to invest in sustainable solutions. It's like if a country is drowning in debt, it's going to be way harder for them to fund renewable energy projects or climate adaptation measures.
Totally. It really highlights how important it is for countries to have their finances in order if they want to create a sustainable future. And the chapter even looks at the reasons behind all this debt, like those past financial crises, imbalanced global trade, and the role of those big international lending institutions.
Yeah, it gets kind of complicated, but it helps to see the bigger picture. And it raises a really important question. How do we create an economic system that's both prosperous and sustainable? Are those things even compatible, or are we stuck with one or the other?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, the chapter doesn't give us easy answers, but it does point to some potential paths forward. Things like green finance, impact investing, and circular economy models, those are all about trying to separate economic growth from resource consumption, which is a huge hurdle.
So maybe it's not about picking between being rich or being sustainable, but about changing what prosperity even means. Yeah, maybe in the 21st century, true prosperity has to include things like clean air and water, a healthy planet, all that good stuff.
I love that. And it's a vision that's gaining traction. More and more people are starting to realize that, the economy, society, and the environment, they're all linked. You can't have one without the others being healthy too.
Okay, and speaking of connections, Chapter 4, Urbanization and Infrastructure, really highlights the impact of how and where we live. It paints this picture of crazy fast urbanization happening all over the world. We're talking megacities popping up everywhere.
Cities are awesome. They're hubs of creativity, innovation, and economic activity. But they also bring some unique challenges when it comes to sustainability, right? They use up tons of resources, create a lot of waste, and are often right on the front lines of climate change impacts.
Totally. And the chapter doesn't sugarcoat it. They point out that over 1 billion people live in slums, mostly in developing countries.
Mm.
That's a crazy number. And it makes you think about things like social justice and making sure everyone has access to those basic services in these rapidly growing urban jungles,
It definitely highlights the need for smart urban planning, the kind that prioritizes the needs of all residents, not just some, making sure everyone has access to affordable housing, transportation, and essential services, while also trying to minimize the environmental impact of all those people living together in one spot.
Makes sense. They even talk about things like green infrastructure, smart cities, and that 15-minute city concept where everything you need is like a 15-minute walk or bike right away.
That's a great example of innovative urban planning. It's about making cities more walkable, bikeable, full of green spaces, and less reliant on cars.
Right. It's like rethinking the city as a place that's not just efficient, but also enjoyable to live in, where people can thrive and connect with each other and with nature.
I love that. And more cities around the world are trying out these sustainable urban development models. It's a global movement.
Okay, ready to geek out a little? Chapter 5, Technology and Innovation, is all about how technology can be a major force for good, and I'm all about that.
Me too. It's amazing how much potential there is for technology to solve these massive problems we're facing. The chapter looks at a bunch of different areas: renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, the whole shebang.
It's crazy how fast things are moving, especially in fields like AI and machine learning. They even talk about how AI can be used to, optimize energy grids, track deforestation, even develop personalized medicine.
And don't forget those mind-blowing advances in renewable energy tech. We're talking solar panels that are getting better and cheaper all the time, and wind turbines that are taller than the Eiffel Tower. It's insane.
It's like living in a sci-fi movie. But the chapter also points out that technology isn't a magic solution, right?
Right.
It can be used for good or bad, and it's up to us to make sure it's used responsibly and ethically.
That's such a key point. They bring up some tough questions like the digital divide, all that misinformation spreading online, and the possibility of people losing their jobs because of automation. These are real issues we need to address if we want tech to truly benefit everyone, not just a select few.
Right. It's like this double-edged sword. We need to be aware of the potential downsides while also using its power for good,
Absolutely. It requires a shift in how we think about technology. It's not just about fancy gadgets. It's about using innovation to solve these complex challenges we're facing.
Ready for a little culture break. Chapter 6 explores cultural dynamics, and it's all about how globalization is impacting cultures around the world. It looks at this tension between, everyone becoming the same and preserving those unique cultural identities.
That's an interesting one. On one hand, we have the super connected world where ideas and trends can spread like wildfire, right? But then there's this fear of losing those unique cultural traditions and languages that make different places special.
It's like a tug of war between becoming more like and staying distinct. And it's happening everywhere. Think about K-pop being popular all over the world, or all those different cuisines fusing and influencing each other.
It's a good reminder that culture is not a static thing. It's always changing and evolving. And while globalization can make things more homogenous, it also creates opportunities for cultural exchange and understanding, which is amazing.
I like that. It's like instead of being scared of everyone becoming the same, we can celebrate those differences and the new hybrid cultures that emerge.
Totally. And the chapter really emphasizes the importance of recognizing and respecting the value of that cultural diversity, It's about celebrating what makes us different while also finding that common ground that connects us all.
One section that really got me thinking was about preserving indigenous cultures. They talk about the challenges those communities face in maintaining their traditions, languages, and ways of life in this rapidly changing world.
It's an incredibly important issue. Indigenous cultures often hold this deep knowledge and wisdom about living sustainably in harmony with nature, something we could all learn from. The chapter mentions efforts to revitalize endangered languages, protect indigenous lands and resources, and make sure indigenous voices are heard in those big decision-making processes.
It's about realizing that they have so much to teach us about living in balance with our planet. Their knowledge and perspectives are so valuable as we try to figure out how to create a sustainable future for everyone.
Absolutely. And it's about ensuring that their rights and cultures are respected and protected.
Okay, back to the heart of the matter. The climate system. Chapter 7, aptly titled Climate System, lays out all the scientific evidence for climate change in a really clear and compelling way. It's a serious wake-up call, you know.
It starts with the basics, global temperature trends, and the data is pretty clear. The planet is warming up, and it's happening faster than ever before. They look at all the historical climate data showing how temperatures have gone up and down over thousands of years. But what's alarming is that steep rise in recent decades, and it lines up perfectly with the rise of industrialization and all those greenhouse gas emissions we've been pumping out.
It's like a giant thermometer screaming at us that something's seriously wrong, you know. And they don't just present the data, they connect the dots, showing how this warming trend is driving all these crazy changes all over the planet, like melting glaciers, rising sea levels, and those extreme weather events that keep getting worse.
Exactly. And it highlights the very real impacts of these changes, not just on the environment, but on people's health and the global economy, too. We're seeing coastal communities having to move because of those rising seas, farmers struggling with droughts and floods, and diseases like malaria and dengue fever spreading even further.
It's a reminder that climate change isn't some far-off problem. It's happening right now, and it's affecting real people's lives in very real ways. One part that really hit me was the section on those extreme weather events, the heat waves, droughts, floods, superstorms. It's honestly pretty scary to think about them getting even more frequent and intense in the future.
That's definitely a crucial part of the climate change story. These extreme events often have the most devastating impacts on people and their livelihoods, you know? And the chapter highlights how they hit vulnerable communities the hardest, making those existing inequalities even worse and threatening things like food security, water resources, and people's health.
It's a stark reminder that climate change isn't just an environmental problem. It's a social justice issue, too. It's about fairness and making sure everyone has the resources they need to adapt and thrive in a changing world. But hey, it's not all doom and gloom, right? The chapter also dives into solutions, focusing on climate change responses in section 7.4.
Exactly. And this is where things start to feel a little more hopeful. They highlight all sorts of actions being taken to tackle this challenge, from those international agreements we talked about, to new technologies, to individual changes people are making in their lives. It's about both mitigation, cutting those greenhouse gas emissions through things like renewable energy, energy efficiency, and sustainable transportation, and adaptation, which means getting ready for those climate change impacts that are already happening and can't be stopped.
Makes sense. It's like we got to slam on the brakes while also buckling up for a bumpy ride.
That's a great way to put it. And the chapter emphasizes that there's no magic bullet, It's going to take a multi-pronged approach with everyone pitching in governments, businesses, communities, and individuals. We're all in this together.
Okay, so we've explored the science of climate change and what people are doing about it. Now let's dive into the amazing world of biodiversity and ecosystems. Chapter 8 paints this incredible picture of how diverse life is on Earth and reminds us that we're just one species among millions,
It's like taking a journey into the intricate web of life, exploring all those connections between different species and the environments they live in. The chapter breaks down the different levels of biodiversity, from genes to species to entire ecosystems, and highlights the incredible variety of life forms we have on Earth, many of which we haven't even discovered yet.
It really makes you realize how much we don't know about the natural world and how much there still is to explore and understand.
Totally. And it highlights how important biodiversity is in keeping ecosystems healthy, which in turn provide all sorts of crucial services for us humans,
Like clean air and water, fertile soil, pollination of our crops, and regulating the climate. We literally depend on all those other species for our own survival. It's mind-blowing.
You got it. But unfortunately, the chapter also paints a pretty sobering picture of the biodiversity crisis we're facing. It's not all sunshine and roses.
They say that species extinction rates are now 100 to 1,000 times higher than what would be considered natural. That's a terrifying statistic.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that we're in the middle of what scientists are calling a sixth mass extinction event. And the driving force behind it is us, human activities like destroying habitats, climate change, pollution, and overexploiting resources. They even dive into specific examples like the effects of cutting down those rainforests in the tropics, the threats to coral reefs from warming oceans and ocean acidification, and those declines in pollinators because of pesticides and habitat loss.
It honestly breaks my heart to read about all these losses, knowing that we're the ones causing them. It's like we're unraveling the very fabric of life on Earth, and it's scary.
It's a big problem, no doubt. And the chapter really emphasizes that we need to act now to protect what's left.
I'm so glad they talk about solutions, too.
Yes.
Section 8.3 focuses on conservation and restoration efforts and showcases all the amazing work being done around the world to protect biodiversity.
It's inspiring, right? They talk about all sorts of different approaches, from creating protected areas and restoring those damaged ecosystems to getting local communities involved in conservation and cracking down on wildlife trafficking.
It gives me hope seeing how dedicated and passionate people are about protecting the incredible diversity of life on our planet.
Me too. It shows that it's not too late. We can still make a difference if we work together and act now.
Okay, we've explored the world on land. Now let's dive into the deep blue. Chapter 9 is all about oceans and marine systems, and it takes us on this awesome journey into this massive and mysterious world.
It's crazy to think that the oceans cover over 70% of Earth's surface and hold 97% of all the water on the planet. They're teeming with life, help regulate our climate, and provide food and resources for billions of people. It's like this whole other universe we're just starting to understand.
Totally. But the chapter makes it super clear that the oceans are facing a ton of threats, many of them caused by us. Right?
Yeah. They start by talking about ocean acidification, this process where the ocean absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which makes it more acidic. It's like a chemical reaction happening on a global scale.
It's like the ocean is doing us a favor by sucking up all that extra CO2, but it's coming at a huge cost to the ocean itself.
Exactly. And that increased acidity is really bad for coral reefs, shellfish, and other marine life that use calcium carbonate to build their shells and skeletons. It's basically dissolving them, which is a huge problem for the whole ecosystem. They also talk about marine pollution, which we all know is a big one, plastic waste, oil spills, all sorts of chemical contaminants, agricultural runoff. It all ends up in the ocean eventually.
Ugh. It's so sad seeing pictures of sea turtles caught in plastic or beaches covered in trash. And it's not just about how it looks, it's about the real harm it does to marine ecosystems and the health of the ocean as a whole.
It really is heartbreaking, isn't it? And the chapter explains how those pollutants can actually build up in the food chain, harming marine life, and potentially even impacting our health when we eat seafood. It's a sobering thought. But it's not all bad news. They also look at potential solutions, focusing on how to manage ocean resources sustainably in Section 9.2.
Okay, that's good. I was wondering what they suggest we do about all this. What kind of solutions are they talking about?
Well, they talk about how important it is to manage fisheries properly. That means setting catch limits and using sustainable fishing practices to prevent overfishing, taking too many fish out of the ocean faster than they can reproduce.
So it's about making sure we don't take more than the ocean can give back to us. Makes sense.
Exactly. And they even share some success stories, like how the cod stocks in the North Atlantic have actually rebounded after being overfished for decades. It shows that with some smart management, we can actually reverse the damage and bring those fish populations back to healthy levels.
That's so encouraging. Gives me hope that we can fix things.
Me too. They also look at the potential of aquaculture, that's fish farming, to provide us with seafood in a more sustainable way. But they also point out that it has to be done right, minimizing the environmental impacts and making sure those fish farms are run responsibly.
It's about finding that balance, right? Meeting our needs without destroying the ocean in the process.
Precisely. It's about understanding that the ocean isn't just some limitless resource we can take from whenever we want. It's a crucial part of our planet's life support system, and we need to treat it with respect.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the challenges of climate change to the incredible world of biodiversity to the vastness of our oceans. It feels like we've barely scratched the surface of all these complex systems and how they're all interconnected.
That's the thing about sustainability. It's multifaceted and constantly changing. But this handbook gives us a really helpful framework for understanding those challenges and the opportunities,
And I love how it doesn't just focus on all the bad stuff. It highlights some pretty amazing innovations and success stories, too, in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, those circular economy models, and all those conservation efforts happening around the world.
It's like a breath of fresh air, right? It reminds us that we actually have the knowledge, the tools, and the creativity to create a better world. But it's going to take collective action, political will, and a willingness to embrace change.
It's like we're explorers setting out into uncharted territory. And we need a map to guide us, this handbook. It feels kind of like that map, doesn't it?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like a roadmap, helping us navigate all these complexities and find those paths towards a more sustainable future.
Exactly. And it's not just about the big global stuff, right? They also zoom in on those foundational things we kind of take for granted, like, the air, the ground, even the frozen parts of the planet.
Yeah, those are like the building blocks of Earth, and they're just as vulnerable to what we humans are doing, just like those big systems we've talked about.
Right. And Chapter 10, Atmospheric Composition, really dives into the science of how our atmosphere is changing, like big time. We're talking greenhouse gases, ozone, air pollution. It's all connected.
It's like peeling back the layers and seeing how all the stuff we do down here affects the very air we breathe, right?
And it's not just about climate change either. They also talk about the ozone layer and how it's actually recovering now, thanks to those international agreements, to phase out the stuff that was destroying it.
That's a great example of how working together can really make a difference. It shows we can solve these massive environmental problems if we put our minds to it and actually cooperate.
Right. It gives you hope amidst all the challenges. But then we get to air pollution. All that particulate matter, smog, all the nasty stuff that's clogging up our air and making us sick.
It's a good reminder that a lot of these environmental issues are linked. Air pollution isn't just a local thing. It affects the climate, our health, ecosystems. It's all connected. And the chapter points out the big sources of that pollution, things like cars, factories, even agriculture, and emphasizes the need for cleaner tech, stronger regulations, and just consuming less stuff in general. It's about making different choices.
Yeah, we need to clean up our acts literally. Okay, let's head to a colder place. Chapter 11, the cryosphere. This is where the handbook takes us to the frozen parts of our planet. Glaciers, ice sheets, sea ice, all that frozen goodness.
It's a pretty cool journey into the icy realms, right? It explores how crucial the cryosphere is for regulating Earth's climate and supporting those unique ecosystems that exist in those freezing conditions. But it's also a reminder of how much climate change is messing things up.
Yeah, the message is pretty clear. The ice is melting.
The chapter paints a vivid picture, shrinking glaciers, ice shelves collapsing, sea ice thinning out. The consequences are huge rising sea levels, changes in ocean currents, loss of habitat for all those iconic polar animals like polar bears and penguins.
They even talk about how the melting of those massive ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica is a major contributor to sea level rise. It's mind-blowing to think about the scale of it all. It's like these giant ice cubes are slowly disappearing, and the whole world is going to feel the effects.
It really shows how connected everything is on Earth and how climate change has these cascading effects,
Yeah.
What happens in one place can impact the entire planet.
Okay, back down to Earth, literally. Chapter 12 focuses on land systems,
Yeah.
and it's all about how we humans use and change the land. We're talking deforestation, urbanization, agriculture. Basically, the human footprint on the planet.
It's like taking a deep dive into our relationship with the land, how what we do shapes the landscape and affects those essential ecosystem services. They cover a lot in this chapter, from land use changes and soil health to the impacts of mining and all that infrastructure we build.
Section 12.1, Land Use Change, is a real eye-opener. They break down those deforestation rates and what's driving it, things like agriculture, logging, mining, and talk about the impact it has on biodiversity, climate change, and those communities who depend on the forests for their livelihoods.
It's a good reminder that forests are so much more than just wood, right? They're crucial for regulating the climate, protecting water sources, and providing habitats for countless species.
It's like we're sacrificing these amazing ecosystems just for short-term economic gains without really thinking about the long-term consequences.
And they really emphasize how important soil health is, which a lot of people don't even think about.
I know, right? We walk all over it every day, but it's easy to forget that soil is this living ecosystem full of tiny organisms that are crucial for plant life and all those natural cycles that keep things in balance.
Exactly. They talk about soil degradation, like erosion, compaction, nutrient loss, all those things that make soil less healthy and productive. And they highlight the need for sustainable land management practices to protect and restore soil health.
It's about realizing that healthy soil is the basis of our entire food system. And it's a finite resource that we need to treat with respect.
You got it. It's about shifting from a mindset of taking to one of stewardship, of caring for the land that sustains us.
Okay, we've covered the air, the ice, the land. Now let's flow into the element that's essential for all life: water. Chapter 13 is all about water resources, and it's a deep dive into the challenges facing this precious resource.
It gives us a really comprehensive picture, the global water cycle, how water is distributed around the planet, and all the growing pressures on freshwater systems from population growth, urbanization, agriculture, and climate change. It's a lot to take in.
They start by pointing out how unequally water resources are distributed around the world. It's crazy to think that some regions have tons of fresh water, while others are constantly struggling with shortages. And climate change is only making these differences even more extreme.
Totally. And they also get into the issue of water pollution. Industrial waste, agricultural runoff, untreated sewage, plastic. So much of it ends up polluting our rivers, lakes, and oceans.
It's hard to believe how much pollution we dump into our water.
Yeah, it's a serious problem. And the chapter talks about how this pollution impacts human health, ecosystems, and even economic development.
It's like clean water is something we take for granted until it's gone. And then we realize just how essential it really is.
You got it. But the chapter doesn't just lay out the problems, it also looks at potential solutions. Section 13.3 focuses on sustainable water management and conservation. They talk about efficient irrigation techniques, rainwater harvesting, water recycling, and the importance of protecting watersheds and wetlands.
It's about recognizing that water is a precious resource, and we need to manage it carefully, both for ourselves and for the health of the planet.
Absolutely. It's about shifting from this mindset of abundance to one of conservation, understanding that every drop counts.
Okay, so we've come to the end of this epic deep dive into sustainability. And I gotta say, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much to learn and so much to do.
It's true. These are complex issues with no easy answers. But I think the most important takeaway is that sustainability isn't just some abstract concept. It's about the choices we make every day, how we consume, how we get around, what we buy, who we support with our money. It all matters.
That's so true. It's about understanding how we're all connected to the planet and to each other and taking responsibility for our actions.
Exactly. And realizing that even small changes can make a big difference when millions of people are making them. It's not about being perfect. It's about making those better choices whenever we can.
It's like those ripples in a pond, right? Even the smallest action can spread outwards and have a wider impact. And it's about staying informed, getting involved in those conversations about sustainability, and demanding action from our leaders.
I love that analogy. The future isn't set in stone, It's something we create together through our choices and actions. It's up to each of us to decide what kind of world we want to leave for those coming after us.
So well said. That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world's sustainability.
Yeah.
Until next time.